You know, there's a major problem about ready to take place here in America if it is allowed to take place, and that is the very real process of voter fraud. And looking at a recent, of course, liberal, I should say, Washington Post article, they were pointing out that the various states that would allow mail-in voter participation in that, their account is that there are 96 million voters who can vote by mail. Now, if you do any research on this subject, you're going to find out, of course, that in all of the liberal search engines, such as Google, or whichever one you might use, they're all liberal, you're going to find that most of the top, if not all of the top searches that are going to come up are going to be from liberal magazines or media sources. And they're going to, of course, take this voter fraud situation and try to mesh it in with absentee voting. And they'll always claim that President Trump, well, he also was a mail-in voter, and that he should not have the privilege of a mail-in vote when no one else does. Well, of course, President Trump did not do mail-in voting. President Trump did absentee voting. There's a very big difference. And here's the big difference right here. With absentee voting, at least in my state, you actually have to go to the administration office, to the clerk's office, and you have to show your picture ID. Of course, you are there in person, so they can compare that to make sure that you are the person that you say you are. And I have absentee voted a number of times, and the bottom line is that every time I've had to go through an identification process that verified I was who I said that I was. Now, of course, you can take this home, and there's always the possibility that somebody could manipulate you into voting for the person that they want you to vote for. Meaning they could give you a gift certificate or whatever, even money for that matter, to have you vote a certain way. Now, frankly, although that does happen, I'm not really that worried about that, because I think the overwhelming majority of people who go and pick up their absentee ballot and show their identification are going to vote for the person that they intended on voting for. So I think the numbers are so small for potential voter fraud in that situation that I'm not too worried about that. But let's take a look at the map here that the Washington Post did print. And I've looked at other maps and they're pretty similar, but this one here gives me a good picture right here. And it says on this map that 52 million voters need an excuse beyond COVID-19 fears to, I assume, vote by mail. But here the bluish green next column, which indicates there are 96 million voters who will be able to vote by mail. And if you look at the yellow square underneath it, it says states that changed due to coronavirus. And then the last two columns, you're going to see it says above it says automatically mailed. And if you add up those two numbers, it says that there are 42 million and then there's 43 million. That means there are 85 million voters that will receive a mail-in ballot automatically. And of course, my state also did that, and I received mine automatically. But let me cover this before I go on. Now, every article that I read that downplayed the fears that President Trump has of voter fraud, of course, tried to make light of it and laughed it off, that his fears were unfounded. But every time they tried to explain it in an article, they were unsuccessful in determining that mail-in voting in and of itself was safe and that no fraud would be able to penetrate this type of voting. But in order for them to give any type of evidence of that, they basically went from mail-in voting to absentee voting. In other words, they tried to mesh the two together in order to make their point. Now, let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Here's an article from factcheck.org, and it says Trump's absentee voting versus mail-in ballot spin. And you know what? I can tell you right now that they're the ones that are doing the spinning. I mean, and that's the way it's been on every single article, and I've read probably close to a dozen already from liberal magazines and media sources. And they all spin mail-in voting and quickly pivot to absentee voting in order to make their point, because that's really the only way they can. Here's the article, and this is what it says. It says, President Donald Trump continues to draw false distinctions between mail-in and absentee ballots, claiming the former are rife with voter fraud, while the latter, which he has used as president, require a voter to go through a very strict process, the equivalent of going to a voting machine, and maybe even sometimes better. Well, it's not better. because once you leave that clerk's office, you can be coerced and manipulated in many different ways to vote for the person that the manipulator wants you to vote for. But let me go on with this article. It says voting experts told us the verification process is the same for absentee voting and mail-in ballots, and many states consider them to be the same thing. Well, that should be reworded and say that many Democratic run and led states consider them to be the same thing, because that's simply not the truth. And I can tell you right now, from personal experience, I've worked with elections multiple times for multiple years, and the process in the state in which I reside make you come in, show a valid ID, and if you don't have a valid ID, you can at least sign on the back stating that you are who you are. And I can tell you right now, in all the times that I've worked the elections, I've only seen 1 or 2 people come in out of the thousands of people that I have helped who did not have some type of valid ID, meaning a driver's license or some other type of picture ID. In fact, I simply can't even remember when somebody had something other than a driver's license. So I can tell you right now, it's almost non-existent for somebody to come in and try to vote without a driver's license. But getting back to the point I'm trying to make. Absentee voting and in-mail ballots are not the same by any stretch of the imagination. Now, I can only go by the state in which I live in. I was sent a voter mail-in registration type of introduction packet. Now, in that packet, there were a number of different things that I had to do, but the main point of this packet and why it was being sent was to acquire my official signature that I was going to use for future mail-in ballots. Meaning that if whatever my signature was and what it looked like from that point on would be used to determine who I was from that point on. So when I voted for the upcoming August 4th elections, I would be sent a mail-in voting ballot. I would mark my votes or my proposal selections, or whatever it is that they were doing at that time. Then I would put it all back into the envelope, but they would ask me to sign my name on the outside of the envelope. They would then, when they receive it, compare it with the signature that they have on file that I sent, again, with the original voter packet, to make sure that the two matched. And of course, if the two matched, then they would send it on as a legitimate ballot, and it would be counted and tabulated. I believe what they do then is they put it in the machine and it counts the vote. And you should also know that I have also worked in some capacity with absentee ballot vote counting. But here's how it can be quickly go from a valid election to voter fraud. When the voter board sends out these millions and millions of voter applications, in other words, the initial voter application, they send it out to everybody that is on the voter roll. Now in California, they sent out 112% of the voter population an initial voter packet. That means that 12% by logic received a voter packet, and they're probably either dead, or they may be an animal of some sort of pet, or who knows who this extra 12% may be. And by example, let's say that there are 1 million people in a voter block, and if 12% were sent out, it would be 1,120,000 voter applications would be sent out to that voter block. That means that 120,000 people are, like I said, are either dead, or they're a pet, or they're something anyway, but they're not voters. So let's say you send out these initial voter applications, and like I said, I received one. All I had to do was print my name and my address, verify that I am who I am by signing an affidavit that they included. It did not require an in-person ID. All I had to do was sign it and declare I am who I am. Of course, by penalty of perjury or whatever the case may be. But that simply means nothing to a voter who wants to cheat. So basically, anybody who receives those extra 120,000, and even within the 100,000, within the million that received it, there's probably going to be people who are dead as well. Whoever is at that residence can sign their name and can duplicate that signature at a later date, such as the November elections. And it's simply not that hard. All I would do is take a picture of my original signature, because they simply don't know what your signature is. They don't have a picture of your driver's license signature at the clerk's office. They're relying upon your original voter application signature that they gathered when they initially mailed out voter applications and are comparing that to the signature that you're going to place on there on the outside of the envelope, we'll say for the November elections. So if they match, which that's not difficult to do, you don't have to match the original voter's signature. All you have to do is match the signature that you put down for that voter. So let's say, for instance, if I wanted to vote for, say, my wife and my 2 grown children who are in college, but they're away at college, it doesn't even matter. If I intercept it and decide that I'm going to vote for the people in my household, I can do that without a problem. I just have to, at the beginning, with the original mail-in, like I said, ballot application, sign their name in my handwriting. And then if I want to be extra careful, I'll just take a picture of that signature with my phone and duplicate it come November. And then when the presidential election comes around, I will again intercept those 4 or 6 or however many votes there are in my household. And again, take a look at what I took a picture of earlier on and just duplicate that signature again. Put them in the mail-in return envelope, sign their name on the outside of the envelope, and send it on. Now, like I said, it doesn't have to be their signature, because the clerk's office does not have their signature on their driver's license. They're only going to have the signature that you sent them on the original voter application packet. So when the clerk or whoever it is that is comparing signatures looks at your ballot and then looks at the signature that you sent them in the original voter application, they're going to see that it matches or that it is very, very close, and they're going to pass it on. So you could absolutely vote for everybody in your house if you wanted to do that. And I can tell you right now, they have no safeguard, because I went down, I tore up my voter application, the original one they sent me, and they asked me for it when I came in to the clerk's office, and I said no, I threw it away. And when I said I wanted to vote absentee, they said, well, it's the same thing as the mail-in ballot, but it's not, because when I asked for the voter ballot, they took my ID, they made me sign for it, and they verified who I was. Then I took it home just like an absentee ballot. I filled out the votes that I wanted to vote for. I sealed it up in the envelope, and I signed my name on the outside. So basically, they have my driver's license picture already, and my signature is on my driver's license, along with the signature that they compared my application and driver's license to when I was at the office. So they know that that will be my signature when I send it in. Now, of course, with absentee ballots, again, that can be manipulated in some way as well, but I really think that's probably a very small percentage of voter fraud. But if you look at these articles that these left-leaning liberal media sources are putting out, you would think that after reading this that they're the same thing, both mail-in voting and absentee. But like I said, it's a rigorous positive identification. Now, you're going to be positively identified as the person who is going to be voting with an absentee ballot, but certainly some fraud is possible. And of course, there's also the second possibility of voter fraud, is that you can coerce those who are in your household or being supported by you to vote whatever way that you want them to vote. In fact, if I were a college student who cared nothing about voting for president or anything else for that matter, and my father or mother demanded that I vote a certain way, I'd just say, hey, listen, you fill it out, I'll sign it, you can vote any way you want. And if I was intent on cheating or trying to manipulate the system, that's exactly what I would do. I would just come to my adult children voters who are living under my household, and I would tell them that I'm filling out your voter application and I want you to sign for it, and simply put pressure on them to allow me to vote in the way that I think our household should vote. And depending on how many people live in your household, let's say that there are 2 parents and 2 adult children, whether they are living at home or living on campus, doesn't matter. You could literally get 4 votes for the price of 1. Now, of course, that is probably the less likely event to take place, but it's definitely not out of the question. But going on with the article here, I just want to go ahead and skip around. It says that some in the media have pointed out the apparent hypocrisy of Trump's position on mail-in voting, given that he voted by mail in Florida, in the Florida primary this year. Again, 2 entirely different methods of voting. They're saying that Trump used a mail-in voting to vote in Florida when he didn't. He used absentee voting, which requires you to actually show up, be properly identified with proper ID, and then you can cast your votes. It's not the same thing. But this is what they've said over and over and over again in all of these liberal articles, trying to converge absentee balloting with mail-in balloting. And here's another half of the argument that in order for them to get away with voter fraud, and that is they always place the argument as of health versus doing our civic duty. In other words, what they're saying is, should we put our health at risk in order to do our civic duty, especially when it can be done safely through mail? And of course, that's the agenda that they're trying to pull off here in the November 2020 election. They're saying it's just too unsafe for people to come out, not only for the pollsters, but also for those who are standing in line. But they know that these people who are going to be standing in line have been doing so since the pandemic began, because they've gone to Walmart, they've gone to Target, they've gone to various grocery stores, and they've all had to socially distance with masks in order to pay for their products or to look at something that they're intending to purchase. And certainly I've stood in line for quite a bit of time, waiting my turn to either pay for something or to look at something. And I can tell you right now, it's no longer than what I would have to stand in line socially distancing with a mask on if I were to vote in an individual voting booth that is going to be 6 feet apart. So I would ask, in whatever state that you live in, that you would speak up and that you would be a part of many who will not allow this scam to take place, especially in such a major election such as this year's 2020 presidential election. I can tell you right now, this pandemic has been a gift to the liberal left because it allows them to manipulate a very liberal public and, frankly, judicial system to allow for a corrupt election, potential corrupt election this November. And I would ask that you don't allow that to happen, that you speak up and you make your voice known. And if in some way we need to sue our individual states to make sure that this simply does not take place, that's something we need to do, is stand up and do that. Well, I hope this information has been valid for you, and if you have a comment that you want to make it. And if you have any updated information regarding what I've said, I would appreciate that as well. Maybe there's something that I missed, or you have a point as far as maybe a counterpoint. But this is something that's been heavy on my mind, because I do believe that, based on my own personal information that I've seen and also participated in, that I really believe that voter fraud could become a very big problem this November. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.